Welcome to a resurrection episode of the McFuture. I don't want to promise anything, but I will try to do some episodes regularly. I've had some big changes in my life, and I don't want to get into it in this particular episode. But I did want to talk about the Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate. I was live tweeting it. And by the way, the best place to follow my mental breakdown is probably on X, which is where most people's mental breakdowns now happen. But it is really, I had a lot of preconceptions, and in some ways I also didn't have a dog in this fight. So my personal inclination was towards RFK Jr. Not so much that he was an amazing candidate, but in terms of representing the positive ideals that I associate with the country and the aspirational things that we want to become, he was most aligned with that. So, and he was the only one talking about health. He was the only one talking about just patriotism in a way that resonated with me, and also really revisiting how government works and whether these agencies are really serving us or not. Now, he has some conspiratorial leanings and some other things that you could debate, of course, but it was by far, just hearing him interviewed long form, it was clear that he actually read books about all of these subjects that he was talking about, whether it was Ukraine or Israel or any of these things. And you definitely don't get that feeling with Trump or Harris. So, in terms of Trump, he is what he is. You know what he is. He's a bullshitter type of guy, MAGA, loves talking at these big rallies. Trump is Trump. And Kamala Harris, to me, my feeling going in to this debate was she is an avatar for the system. In fact, that's been two candidates in a row that the Democrats put out that are essentially empty husks, that are just vessels for carrying DNC agenda items and donor priorities into the presidential office. In fact, arguably, we have not had a president for maybe a year, maybe more. Who knows what contribution Biden is actually making. As of now, I don't think we have an actual president. We have this sort of confederacy of flunkies that are running the DNC and the Democratic Party. And Biden is the avatar, and Kamala will be a similar avatar. And that was my feeling. And she also says a lot of dumb things, and she's very proud of herself when she says it. She talks in circles, and it's clear that she doesn't do the homework, but she's proud of herself as if she has, and as if she said something really profound. Anyway, if I motivate myself, maybe at the end of this video, I'll put a collage together of all of her circle talk. But regardless, that's my opinion. So, in both cases, I see both votes as completely justifiable. And here's what I mean by that. A vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for the system. So if things are working out for you, and let's face it, for most white collar business professionals who went to college, life is pretty good. Their 401ks are doing well. They've got a couple of kids, they've got a house, they're doing pretty well. So regardless of all the woke nonsense in the Democratic Party and some of the flights of fancy that they've taken, for the most part, they have every reason to uphold the system that gave them this great life. So in that regard, a vote for Kamala Harris is perfectly logical. But if you're not happy with the system, if you're not happy with your life, if things did not go as planned or as promised, then overthrowing the system, or at least shaking it up a little, does make sense as well. And that's what Trump does. Trump is some sort of agent of chaos. Some of it positive, some of it negative, but a lot of it unpredictable. And we've seen some of it before. Some of it was clearly manufactured by his political enemies, and others was self-inflicted. He doesn't shut up. He says a lot of nonsense, and it gives a lot of ammunition to his enemies. Anyway, so these were all my preconceptions going in. So I'll go through my notes on the debate. I'll try to make them make sense out of context, because I was really commenting on the debate as it was going. But I think you'll find it interesting. There were some real gems in here. Anyway, so my first thought was, and this was right before the debate started, do we need any of these commentators? The world would be better off with Reince Priebus as a goat herder. I'm not even sure I know how to pronounce his name, Reince Priebus. What country is that from? And I know he served in some administration, but he's some kind of government deep state flunky. And I don't mean deep state in a conspiratorial way. I just mean a guy who circles the toilet bowl somewhere in DC, some like low level guy. Anyway, and a while back I tweeted, so apparently at the time Kamala Harris was seeking changes to the debate rules. And I wrote, quote, "Okay, roll him in on a gurney, his face muzzled with an ether rag, and my buzzer sends 1,000 volts directly to his nipple. That's my final offer, Kamala Harris." So, and my comment was, wheel him in. Then I said, something will die during this debate. I believe it will be specificity. Neither of these two people are known for discussing specifics. Trump famously just talks a lot of BS, and Kamala talks in circles. So together, you will not get a lot of facts and figures. And what's funny is I was looking at the two hosts, and the ABC host, I don't know what his name is, but he had this generic news anchor expression from like the 80s or 90s, like Peter Jennings or one of these types of guys. Like he's this leftover from an era that is completely dead or almost dead, where we're not going to be sitting there watching news anchors anymore. And if they do exist, for anyone who wants them, they're going to be AI generated. He looked AI generated, let's put it that way. And if he were, you wouldn't know it, because a guy like him would be extremely easy to replicate, because we've had thousands of him on TV in every local market and on the networks. And no audience. Pussies. I like the Roman Colosseum quality of politics now, because at this point, Trump is performing in arenas, then Kamala was out there dragging out like Megan Thee Stallion or whatever the fuck her name is. But they're out there essentially like, oh, look at all these people who showed up to Kamala Harris event. No, they didn't show up to Kamala Harris event. They showed up to Megan Thee Stallion. I swear I don't know her name, and I really wish I didn't. They showed up to Megan Thee Stallion concert that happened to also have Kamala Harris. But regardless, Kamala Harris was kind of a manufactured entity in my mind, because all of this phony excitement around her candidacy was really almost identical to the phony narrative about Biden being alive, because it's clear he's been dead for a very long time, or at the very least impaired to the point of just being a vegetable, as we saw on the debate. But anyway, so it's obvious the media has Kamala as their preferred candidate, and they're serving up all of the DNC talking points. But regardless, Kamala started out a little bit wobbly, but overall a decent answer on housing. And then you could tell she was rehearsed on all of her personal stories, and they're working pretty well. She started out attacking tariffs, which ironically, the Biden administration not only preserved all of Trump's tariffs, but they actually extended them to all of their favored industries, because the two parties are owned by different corporations in different industries. So they'll just set rules for whichever ones favor theirs. And Trump, he still doesn't understand how tariffs work or who pays for them, because ultimately, yeah, of course, consumers in the US are who pays for them. And of course, they're inflationary because prices go up, especially on things that are necessities. It's that simple. But the way he talks about it shows he still either doesn't understand them, or he's just kind of bullshitting his way through because he thinks tariffs are something we should have. And he's also right that Biden did keep most of his tariffs. Trump goes into his immigrant shtick pretty quickly. They're taking over towns. And, it's just not clear to me how much this negativity will sway independence. And then Kamala goes into her BS about the COVID era. And even though she's technically correct that they took over and inherited this broken economy from Trump, but only because of COVID and because of a lot of the restrictions that not only did Democrats support in all of the states, but exacerbated. So to say that, they took over this crippled economy from Trump is kind of a half-truth, honestly. At that point, I started to realize she's doing better than I expected. And Trump really is on shaky ground with COVID stuff because his side doesn't like the vaccines or the shutdowns or all the bad judgment calls that he made, like keeping Fauci, who clearly is not an honest broker because he actually funded Wuhan and covered it up and lied to Congress and all kinds of other things, made up the social distancing rules and all kinds of other stuff. The guy is really just kind of a dirty troll that lives inside of government and just feeds off of it. He's just a bottom feeder. And it didn't take Kamala long to go, well, 60 Nobel laureates say that my economic policies, it's sort of like the 200 former intelligence agents say that the Hunter Biden story is fake, which of course it wasn't. It's just, more of this DNC psychobabble misinformation stuff, but whatever. Trump is really weak on tariffs. I'll just make 5 really basic points about it. 1, tariffs do make imported goods more expensive, so they are inflationary. 2, corporations in China and other countries are intertwined with government. So they receive all kinds of subsidies, like for overseas shipping. China subsidizes that. Competing outside of pure market forces, like dumping goods onto our market. So we're not really competing on a level playing field. So they've got either tariffs or subsidies, and we probably should have something comparable just in terms of trade parity. The third point is it's far from certain whether or not domestic players become more competitive from protectionism. But the net cost to consumers is always going to be way more than the dollar benefit to one industry or its employees. So in other words, consumers will get hurt more than employees in one little narrow industry will benefit. Biden administration, I mentioned before, has been more MAGA than Trump. They preserved everything and then added other tariffs. And then the last point is some industries like food, military, drugs, and other strategic industries are justifiable to protect and not leave just to market forces, or at the very least diversify our sourcing. And that's because in emergency, you don't want to rely on foreign countries, just like we did during COVID, on very important medicines that China manufactured for us. We can't let that happen again. And Kamala very quickly went into her, let's be clear, and she goes, he invited trade wars. Meanwhile, they invited actual real wars. I wish Trump caught on to that, but he didn't. I wish. Honestly, I don't care. And she was extremely well prepared. She was quoting his tweets back to him. And I think Trump has a good amount to work with in terms of her past positions that were very weird and very leftist, in terms of defund the police and bailing out these rioters and all this other stuff. There's so much to choose from, but he doesn't have that attention to detail, so he didn't have anywhere near her level of preparation. And then he started throwing out around the Marxist label, which realistically does not work outside of the internet, not as well as Republicans think. And most Americans think Marx was a silent movie star. They have no idea who Karl Marx is. Have you seen Americans' grades? They're not known for their scholastics. Abortion, I get why Democrats are trying to make it an issue, but realistically, in practice, the point should be moot by now at a national level. And that's the angle Trump should take, but he kind of goes off into his own Trump mental gymnastics. At the end of the day, the Democrats have no viable national proposal that could bring back Roe v. Wade protections on a national level. They don't have the votes, they don't have the policy, and they cannot defeat the Roe v. Wade decision. It's impossible. In fact, they had plenty of opportunities when they had majorities with Obama to codify them into law, and they did not. So at this point, I don't even understand why we're discussing it. So if the Democrats really cared about abortion, not just using it as a fundraising issue, then what they would do is create a fund to help women who live in states where abortion is banned to get them the abortions that they need. And that's realistically the most they can do. But they're not doing that. They're just using it for fundraising. So it's kind of cynical. It's really smart to try to link Trump to abortion bans because she gets to claim the high ground as a woman, and he's going to lose that one every time, realistically. It's also smart of Kamala to try to link him to Project 2025, but it's sort of like Trump trying to link her to Marxism, because outside of the internet, most Americans think Project 2025 is a PowerPoint that's due on Monday. They have no clue what that means. And Trump's second try on abortion was a little bit better, but net, he's never going to get the high ground on this. And, I just think it needs to be dropped as an issue. And I think there's just a lot of people who still are clinging to this as a thing. And they think it's just going to, I don't know. I think both parties, or at least the Democrats, are now using it very cynically. And Republicans, I think, got what they wanted. And then in the states where they control it, they can restrict it. She did do a very good job of limiting her circle talk, because that is her trademark. Trump, I found it funny when he said, "I have been a leader on IVF." Yeah, he mentioned it once in a rally. That's it. There's no policy position. There's no anything. There's no plan for paying for it. None of it. It's just talk. It's just bullshit. And then they started talking about immigration. I tweeted, "Immigration, hide your pets." In case you don't know what that means, I'll explain in a second. she then goes back to going to identifying as a prosecutor. So now she's Kamala the cop. First, she was siding with BLM and with the rioters, and then she became the cop again. She really kind of flip-flops back and forth depending on whether she's trying to appease the left of the party and be to the left of Bernie Sanders, or she's now talking to a general audience and has to completely rewire everything. She's got a lot of identities to manage. She must have a very good notes app. And it's pretty much official. Whatever you believe that she stands for, she is extremely well rehearsed, was extremely well rehearsed. And her dagger in this debate was commenting on the insanity of Trump rallies. She's like, oh, I encourage you to go to a Trump rally and see how crazy it is. And it really hits him where it hurts his ego, because he loves nothing more than standing in front of these crowds and just getting the adulation and just talking trash for 2 hours. It really is insane. And he literally went there. He said, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets. Holy shit, he said it. The memes are alive. So in case you haven't been paying attention, there was a meme going around the internet that Haitian immigrants in Ohio are eating people's cats and dogs, their pets basically, and then other random animals they happen to find. And it turns out that it was a hoax. They asked the police chief there, and he was like, we don't have any reports of this. So, you know, who knows whether any of this has happened. Some people online talking trash. But to bring it into presidential debate at the level of the low level of knowledge that we have, he's like, oh, and lots of people on television are saying it. And I wrote, oh God, so stupid. Trump, what the fuck are you doing? Dumbass. I literally tweeted that. It's just so dumb. And what's the point? He just can't control himself. He can't help himself. And at that moment, she pulled out all the anti-Trump Republicans. It was the perfect time to do it, right after the eaten pets. And, you know, and it's funny, he goes on to start talking about how they, in the Biden Harris administration, never fire all of these people who screw up, who let all these illegals in and all this other stuff. And he's right about firing people, but he also hired a bunch of crappy people. And so, you know, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Biden never fires screw-ups, and Trump hires a bunch of screw-ups, but does eventually fire them. So pick your poison, right? Neither would be considered a great manager, regardless. And it's funny because the moderator, he asked Trump, how would you deport all of these people? Now, the correct answer would be exactly like Barack Obama did, because there are multiple articles from 2010, 2014, and 2015 from NPR, The Guardian, and Washington Post talking about, there was one titled Obama Deporter in Chief. That was from The Guardian, which is left-leaning. Deportations higher under Obama than Bush. That's 2010. And 2015, Washington Post. U.S. plans raids to deport families who surged across the border. So that would be the best answer and a winning answer, but Trump, for whatever reason, is unprepared and incapable of delivering it. And really here is where the Democrats' lawfare pays off, which is basically tossing all these crazy lawsuits against Trump. And let's not fool ourselves. Yeah, Trump is, you know, he does some shady business dealings, but honestly, no more than most other business people who make it to that level, especially in New York, or certainly in the casino business or anything of that sort. So is he unique in the development business? No, he's exactly what you would expect. But painting him as a criminal was the game all along. So whether it's the impeachment, whether it's throwing all these harassment suits and all this other stuff, and it'll be interesting to see if it works. It'll work on some people, but maybe it'll work better than people think it will, or certainly than Republicans think it will. But he is right about them weaponizing the justice system against him. Absolutely, that happened. And I'm saying this from a nonpartisan lens. I have no love for Trump or Harris. And, you know, he just says so much bullshit, talks so much smack that he gives his opponents almost infinite ammunition to paint him any way he wants to. And they did ask a good question about all of Kamala's, excuse me, 1 second. He did ask a good question about all of Kamala's flip-flops. And realistically, as I said earlier, she stands for nothing. It's easy for a person like her to flip-flop. I don't think she has any deep foundational principles. She just doesn't. And look, people will argue with me, but they'd be wrong because that's just the reality. Anyone who flip-flops that easily on things has no beliefs. And I'm not saying she's a bad person. In fact, if I were going drinking with somebody of any of the candidates that ran this cycle, by far, Kamala would be my favorite. First of all, she would laugh at all of my jokes and a bunch of random sentences. She'd be laughing at everything. Excuse me. She also would know all the wines, clearly. She's the tipsy aunt, if nothing else. And also, you know, I just think she's a fun hang. I have nothing personally against her. But the bar is not the bar for a president. We need a raging narcissist who spouts BS in front of crowds and blames others for everything. I don't know. Trump is a very specific taste, an acquired taste. And he's really been so thoroughly painted as a villain by corporate media that the more he denies all the stuff that's been tossed against him, the guiltier he sounds, even though he's correct at least 50% of the time. And of course, Kamala throws in the quote, fine people on both sides. That is not what he meant, but it keeps being used. There's really no way for him at this point to overcome this railroading that was done against him. And, you know, a lot of it is his own fault. And he's also right about the bloodbath comment. They use that against him. He was referring in an economic sense about trade, but they're using it in some sort of like violent revolution sort of way, which is total bullshit. But again, he says so much stuff, you know, and look, you know, they brought up election tampering and look, I think election fuckery is a real problem, and not having IDs to vote is a deliberate strategy by the Democrats to flood additional voters, however it is that they do it, because, you know, the more marginally legal people are, and also wanting to legalize illegals, which Chuck Schumer has stated that he wants to do, as have others, as has Nancy Pelosi. They want to legalize all these millions of people that they've allowed in, and they're betting that they're going to vote blue, and they're going to basically make the Democrats the permanent majority party. So yeah, that's a legitimate strategy that they're using. And also mail-in votes. Mail-in votes for the longest time since I started voting years and years ago have always been extremely rare. Essentially, mail-in votes were for U.S. service members overseas or something like that. You would never in a million years have this insane flood that they created during the pandemic. So again, these are all strategies to flood votes in on your side. But I tweeted, I don't know how Republicans plan to A, prove it, or B, fix it. They haven't thus far. And not sure if independents care that much. And really, I think it's an existential issue. I think there absolutely should be IDs to vote. And I think we should have a day off for people to go and vote and do it like every other civilized country. This bullshit, the idea that Democrats convinced white people, dumb, well-meaning, but dumb white people, that black people don't have IDs is so mind-blowing to me. Literally every move you make in this country requires an ID to drive, to get a job, to do anything, to get benefits. Whatever part of the spectrum you're on in this country, you have an ID. So this ridiculous idea that black people don't have ID was only a cynical strategy to make sure that it's viewed as racist. So then people demand there be no IDs at the polls. And we need IDs at the polls just like every other country does. Because of all these narratives that the ether that are in the ether, Kamala had so many good cards to play, and she played them all. Republicans against Trump, all the lawsuits, January 6th, election denial, and she executed very well, extremely well. And as much trash as I've talked about her, she looked presidential. And it kind of pains me to say that a little bit because I did talk a lot of smack about her. And then even on Gaza, Israel, she sort of went into explainer mode. But overall, pretty good answer. Except for one basic fact. She's in power right now. Or Biden and the DNC are in power right now. And they haven't done any of these things that she's talking about in terms of Gaza-Israel peace. But she really has learned to walk the tightrope on Gaza and Israel, and she executed beautifully. It was really well done. I was very impressed. And it's true. He said she didn't meet with Netanyahu. She didn't do it for optics reasons because at the time, I guess she was trying to appease all the protesters in the left flank of the party. Now that's over in the general election. No more appeasing them. Now you got to move towards the middle. And he is probably right that he is better for peace. And she also is right that he's not respected by world leaders. He's not loved by them, but he may be feared by them. He is perceived as somewhat crazy, which many will accept over respected. And Biden's weakness realistically not only goaded us and Ukraine and Israel into wars, but, I just think his weakness was an invitation. It was an invitation maybe for China to take actions in Taiwan and certainly for Iran to be as rambunctious as they've been, and certainly Turkey, which is a NATO country, which is now talking about Muslims rising up against the Jewish state, this tiny little dot that you could barely see on the map, and this giant conquered territory that is Muslim and Arab. It's so insane to me, but the things that are being tolerated because we don't really have a president is beyond me. And I think Trump is wrong saying that she hates Israel. I think her beliefs are as fluid as our genders at this point. And I wrote, I have underestimated her. She is such a pro at playing this part. When she has to, she will study, and she clearly did. It's really striking how much oxygen this debate in this debate was burned up talking about Trump and all of his nonsense, and not about the vision for the country or how they're going to help Americans. It is so exhausting. And most of it is self-inflicted. And it's the irony of Trump that the thing that got him elected is also his Achilles heel, which is this insanity and this torrent of craziness that follows him. And yes, some of it was artificially manufactured against him, but a lot of it is also self-inflicted. So, he giveth and he taketh away. He said, of course, I'll solve it in 24 hours, talking about Ukraine. His plan, realistically, is just an exit for us out of Ukraine, and Ukraine is going to take it on the chin. But I think that's inevitable, regardless of who's in power or when it happens. It's just a matter of how many more people need to die, because I don't think Ukraine is winning this war. And I do think there's probably some messaging we should have that we're not going to leave them hanging, but Trump is just incapable of delivering that. And he is right about the numbers of deaths. And realistically, this whole thing was so avoidable. I did a whole series on that. His best line was, "We have a president that doesn't know he's alive." It's a line I've used, but it's funnier coming out of him and at the debate. And I started wondering, what anti-laughing gas did they give Kamala? Why isn't she on this 24/7? Is it deadly? She really did a good job of containing her involuntary laughter. I don't know what they did to her. I don't know what they shot her up with. But whatever it is, she needs more of it, and she needs it 24/7. And her quote was, "Thanks to us, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country." And I posted a picture of Ukraine basically on fire. Look, it is not an independent and free country, because without our weapons, there would be no Ukraine. So they are completely and utterly beholden to the US and NATO. So this idea that Ukraine exists as a country is insane at this point, because without us, there would be no Ukraine. So we're the thing propping it up. And Trump goes, "Quiet, please," before talking about Ukraine. And it's just so surprising. I wrote, how isn't he burying her on Ukraine? They started 2 wars on their watch. He should be killing it on this, and he's not. It was just not the slam dunk it should have been. And she said she met with Zelensky 5 times. And I wrote, was there McDonald's ribbon cutting in Odessa? She is not known for being handed the important tasks. They kept demoting her. She was like, "Oh, border czar." And then it's like, how about talk to Nassau kids? And then that didn't work out. And they're like, "Okay, we're going to send you to Slovakia to cut a ribbon." And that's really been her vice presidency. It's been out of sight, out of mind, until she became the messiah when the DNC and its media machine decided that she was going to be the candidate, because that was the only way they can keep all the money that was raised by Biden. Anyway, she's doing the righteous indignation thing great. Even though she has 0 principles and flip-flopped on every positions, she really is an impressive construct, a perfect political vessel. And I tweeted all this. I take everything back. Now I see how she got where she got. And I say that with all honesty. Now, it's a little bit of a backhanded compliment, obviously, but I definitely, for the first time, started to see what other people saw in her and why she got to where she got. She's very calm, meticulous, righteous, and well-rehearsed. Honestly, I was blown away. And if it was solely based on this debate, she would win. Then when they were talking about the Afghanistan withdrawal, Trump, these are actual quotes. "I told Abdul, figure it out, Abdul. We're leaving, Abdul." Trump's new sitcom, "Figure It Out, Abdul." That tweet has been doing very well. It's been circulating on the internet, so to speak. He really did put his foot in his mouth on that thing when he started questioning Kamala's blackness. And he's like, well, she was Indian, she's black. There's no way to win on this subject. But it is kind of rich hearing her talk about dividing people by race when literally every single one of her fundraisers is white women for Kamala, Caribbean Americans for Kamala, out for Kamala, Native women, and Two-Spirit call for Kamala Harris. The Democrats literally subdivided the country into these little voting blocks that are convenient for them, but extremely divisive and corrosive for the country. But obviously that doesn't matter in debate format, but it's just so cynical, and it's really gross. Anyway, she went into some platitude jumble about race. And she was right about this birther thing that Trump was on, and it is pretty racist. It just, again, we were back at Trump sucking up all of the oxygen with his Trumpiness. It is so exhausting. And his quote, "She is Biden," is a very good angle of attack, but he didn't back it up with any substance. He's always at the surface level, and it's always negative, and it's always petty. And I tweeted, somebody get me RFK and his bear. In case you haven't heard, RFK had a dead bear in his trunk that he was going to use the meat, but then he didn't have time, so he took it as a prank to Central Park to make it look like it was hit by a bicyclist. Anyway, it's such a bizarre story that it makes it hard to support him. I just have to, in my mind, separate out the personal lives of these people from their political lives. Otherwise, you will go insane. You could not vote for any of these people. Like, Kamala's husband cheated, and he has some like crazy sordid story. You can't get into all this stuff because you will make yourself insane. And she said, let's turn the page. That's their big slogan. I expected Bob Seger to come out because that's his famous song, Turn the Page. And the other question was, 9 years later, where is this health plan that you talked about, Donald Trump? And I wrote, Trump's terrific plan is coming. Trust me, it's coming all over us. Bottom line, if you're waiting for Trump to give you health care, you will die. You will absolutely die. So that is not a priority for him. That is not a Republican priority. They do not care. And Kamala, she basically just supports status quo. So whatever Obamacare is today, it will be exactly that going forward, because Pfizer and Aetna and all of these healthcare companies are the ones who have a vote because they vote with their dollars in support of the DNC. We do not have a vote on this anymore because there is no party currently. Other than RFK, there is no other candidate that would be willing to stand up for Americans on healthcare. And it's funny, she keeps using the term access to healthcare. Yeah, you can access it if you can afford it. And Republicans aren't giving you any healthcare or childcare. There was a clip of J.D. Vance talking about childcare. He was asked, well, what's your plan? Because you're obviously for Americans having more children. And his answer, literally, I'm not joking. I'm not going to have time to put a clip out. But he said, well, if you have grandparents, that would be a great place to start. Give them to the grandparents. Basically, his solution is no solution. There is no version of reality where Republicans fund childcare, healthcare, or any social service except things that maybe already exist and they absolutely cannot cut, because they are a party that is in the rebate business. They are in the tax rebate business for their donors. Democrats also, but they at least have some notions of helping, even though they're not very good at it. Then they get into climate, and Kamala does a laundry list of all the things they've invested in with the IRA, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation. In fact, it added to inflation because it was so expensive, costing like $1 trillion or something. And it really puts our deficit at an existential risk. I mean, we're not in good shape. And the jury's still out on the IRA, because you can juice the supply, but that doesn't mean you're going to have demand or that these industries are going to be globally competitive. This is what happened with EVs, electronic vehicles. They spent all this money, gave billions and billions of dollars to these manufacturers, and no one is buying these cars. They were for a little while, and then it completely tapered off. Even Teslas have tapered off. And all of these executives are on record basically saying, we'd rather eat the losses than keep making these cars. So yeah, it's stagnating because the technology isn't quite there yet, and you just can't keep funding that, but not fund the electric grid that's going to support it, and not fund the battery technology and get that up to par. Because realistically, electronic vehicles will not beat gas-powered ones until they're as fast to fill up as a gas vehicle, without waiting for hours for it to fill up or installing some special charger at your house. Some people live in apartment buildings or whatever. Secondly, the cars have to be much cheaper. And third, the range has to be higher. That's the bottom line. So it's just not going to happen. And then they went into closing statements. Kamala's was all Democratic boilerplate and platitudes, and it's kind of smart for her to play it safe, and it might just be enough to win. And then she goes into her little personal story and as a prosecutor, blah, blah, blah. It's all fine, competently executed. Overall, I gave her a B+. And then Trump's closing statement. Why hasn't she done it was a great angle, and I think that should have been the entire theme of it. But then he goes into saying, quote, "We're a failing nation." At first I wrote, it's a bad angle. And then I wrote, other countries are watching this. This is a scorched earth type of commentary that only benefits Trump. It is so self-serving, and I fucking detest it. I detest it. I hated every second of it. And it was at that moment that I tweeted, honestly, after this, I might vote for Kamala, because I was so disgusted by that angle. We're a failing nation. What president talks like that? What leader leads people like that? What executive at a company would go up in front of, whatever, like let's say you're an ambitious executive that wants the CEO job. Would you go up there and go, this company is failing and only I can say? I mean, there's no version of reality where that makes sense in any context at all. And it just infuriated me. And it just underscores how petty and small and just pathetic and egotistical Trump is. It's just, it turned my stomach. And then, I wrote that, and then I saw a tweet by Elon Musk where he made a fair point. He wrote, "The publicly stated goal by almost all leaders of the Democratic Party is to legalize the 15 million illegal immigrants as soon as possible, as well as bring in tens of millions more. That would immediately make all swing states deep blue, just like happened in California with the 1986 amnesty, turning America into a permanent one-party state. This is the last real election if Trump loses." I want to parse the truth from the bullshit here. I think it's too conspicuous to just open the border the way they did. There was a strategy behind it. This, at first, I thought it was just economics. It's like, let's reduce the pressure on wages, and having all of these new cheap laborers will make prices of certain goods and certain inputs much cheaper. So I thought that was a legitimate explanation. But I do think there's more than that, because it's just so unfettered. It is so wide open. And then when Schumer went out there and said that we support amnesty and we want to make all these people citizens and make it legal for them to vote, at this point, it's not a conspiracy. At this point, that is a strategy. And look, it's a good strategy, but it's not good for the country, because look at what's going on in California. California is running unbelievable deficits. They're the highest tax state. People have been exiting San Francisco and the state in general. They are in huge trouble. And then they're arguing about bullshit like genders and transgender surgeries and giving loans to illegal immigrants. All this stuff is just pure insanity. And the reason that's happening in California is it's become a one-party state. There's not a competition of ideas. And as a country, we're already down to two parties. Do you want to have one-party rule? Because that's autocracy. And so I think we really need to think about this. And I honestly have to think it through, because not that my vote is so important, but realistically, this is a huge risk, and you need to maintain balance in the system. And is the price of one more Trump presidency a price we're willing to pay for that? Number one. And number two, I think Trump's 2028 running mate will be Suge Knight. Thanks. Good night. Follow me at Steve Faktor or at Idea Factory online. I might do more of these McFutures. We'll see how it goes.